Hey, okay. Well, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for being patient as we let people trickle in, and hope you enjoy some of the music in the background. So, just to introduce myself and what we're doing here today. My name is Masiri Adibo Ashford. I am the co-executive director of NoirUnited International. I'm here with Naseem, who's co-hosting this with me.
Hi, everybody. My name is Naseem Ashford, also co-executive director and one of the founders of NoirUnited International.
Nice. So guys, feel free to come off of camera when you're if you're ready, if you want to. But this is going to be a nice discussion. We have Melvin Foote here who will be doing a proper introduction to in a second. But I just wanted to share with you all, if you haven't heard about Noir United, but I think most of you here have. But Noir United was started in 2020 in Atlanta, Georgia, in June of 2020. And at that time, it was during the midst of the Black Lives Matter protests after the death of George Floyd and several others who had seen a lot of police violence. And we came together to start an organization that could bring African peoples, so not only the African immigrants, but also Caribbeans, African Americans, together in support of the African diaspora, and so that we could build our communities and figure out strategies to do that. And so Noir United is a global development and humanitarian organization. We focus on connecting Africa and the diaspora through community-based interventions. And we have been doing a lot of work since, and I think maybe some of you all have watched us throughout this time, but we started off with supporting Black-owned businesses in Atlanta, Georgia, who were affected by the crisis. And so these businesses, some of them to this day are continuing to thrive and grow. We also responded to the crisis in Ukraine, supporting African students who face racial discrimination and a lack of access to humanitarian resources. And so we responded to that in 2022. We've been continuing to engage with students who are still in Europe or who have gone back to the continent, or those who also made it to the United States and continued their studies. We were happy to share that we were able to provide scholarships, full ride scholarships for students who made it to the United States. And so that's the impact of the work that we've been able to do thus far. And now we are in DC, really trying to understand the policy and advocacy space and see how we can galvanize the diaspora youth to get more engaged in having an impact around the world. And so I'm going to pass it to Naseem, and he's going to introduce the series and our speaker.
Thank you, Maseri. So we're happy to share in with you all the launch of our new program called NoirUnited Voices of the Diaspora. This program is developed, one, to connect the youth and people who are young like us with the people who've come before us. What we're trying to do is bridge the intergenerational divide. A lot of you all hear Masiri and I talk about Africa all the time. We're talking about the different issues and crises that are happening all over the continent. And it might seem out of nowhere or out of place, right? But for us, because we've been able to study and research and connect with different individuals like Melvin and others who have been doing this work for 30 plus years, we know that we're not alone, and we know that we're not doing anything new. And so this whole series is designed to bring the experts to you so that you can hear directly from them what's worked, what they've accomplished, and then also what some of the challenges are. Because as a whole, the youth are going to be the ones to represent the next generation of leaders. And we believe that everyone on this call is the next generation of leaders. And in order to move into that next phase, we have to have the knowledge and know where we're coming from in order to operate in the current environment that we have. And so I'm proud to read the bio of Melvin Foote, who's our mentor. We've known Melvin for going on 3 years now. Melvin, we connected with him while we were responding to the Ukraine war. and Melvin in the Constituency for Africa supported our work. And so that's how we originally became introduced. But I'm going to go ahead and read his bio so you can learn a little bit more. And then after that, you'll get to know Melvin through the interview and questions. Okay. So Melvin is a seasoned strategist and advocate who has dedicated his career to strengthening ties between Africa and the United States. As the founder of the Constituency for Africa, he has advised the U.S. administrations, mobilized the African diaspora, and played a key role in shaping critical policies impacting Africa. His work has helped advance trade, governance, and development initiatives all across the continent, including establishing African Union missions in Washington, D.C., the creation of the AGOA, which we'll talk more about while we're here, and PEPFAR, which is the Presidential Initiative on AIDS and HIV, which did a lot of good humanitarian work all across the country. The Constituency for Africa continues to be a driving force in fostering collaboration between African nations, the U.S. government, NGOs, and the private sector. And so with that, I'm going to open it up for the first question to Melvin. And what we would like to know is, can you tell us about your background and how you became interested in Africa and policy?
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I always like to talk to the next generation. That's always been a passion of mine. And so I got involved. I grew up in the Midwest, a place called Rockford, Illinois, which is about 75 miles northwest of Chicago. And my people were poor. They were Black. They were a typical Black family that migrated to the north from the south, being chased from, post-slavery and Jim Crow and the lynching and all the crazy things that were going on in the South. So they took the first opportunity to get out of there, and they landed up north, took factory jobs up north, and that was their life. No one in my family had been to college. There was no intellectual stimulation whatsoever in my neighborhood. But I played basketball. I became a pretty good basketball player in high school, and I got college offers. So I said, okay, I'll take a look at these college offers. I'm going to go to the school that is farthest away from Rockford. That was my criteria. I didn't look at science or math or any of the curriculum. I just wanted an adventure. So I landed in a place called Gunnison, Colorado, Western State College, which is about 200 miles southwest of Denver, straight up in the Rocky Mountains. It's a small school, but it was an absolutely different experience from what I was accustomed to growing up. So I played basketball up there, and this was during the late 60s and early 70s. And so it was the time of Vietnam. It was the time of the Black Civil Rights struggle. And I was high up in the Rocky Mountains. So I took that same struggle with me up at the school. One of the things I did, I started a column in the newspaper, and I called it the back of the bus because Black people had to sit in the back of the bus. That was the seat designated for Blacks. So I called my column the back of the bus. In other words, this is what we're talking about among Black people. And so I would every week write about a Black figure, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Julian Bond, and others. So finally, I got a letter from an email from it wasn't an email, it was a letter because we didn't even have emails back then. But I got a note from one of my students, colleagues, who had just come back from the Peace Corps in Ghana. He was a white guy from Michigan, and he fell in love with his girlfriend who was from Ghana, and he was going to marry her, but his parents certainly objected to it. And so he was tossing around, should he marry her or not marry her? And he wanted my opinion about interracial marriage. Well, I had no idea. I was not the love doctor, but I asked him about the Peace Corps. And he told me about the Peace Corps. My light bulb went off. I said, I'd like to do that. And so I put in my application, and I didn't hear anything for 6 months. So I just assumed it wasn't going to happen. I didn't know what the Peace Corps was. So finally, I got a letter from the Peace Corps saying, you've been accepted, and you're going to go to Ethiopia as a Peace Corps volunteer. Well, first of all, I didn't know where Ethiopia was at. I thought it was in the Middle East because in the Bible, you talk about Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Ethiopia. I said, I don't want to go to the Middle East. So I went to the library. You couldn't Google back then. So I went to the library, found an atlas, and saw a map of Africa. And I saw where Ethiopia was in the heart of Africa. So I said, wow, I'm going to go there. I was excited about it. So I graduated in June. And in July, I was headed to Ethiopia as a Peace Corps volunteer. Now, I didn't know anything about Africa at the time. I thought Tarzan, the legendary Tarzan, who was a TV character where the white man was living in Africa, could swing on the vines and could talk to the animals. I really thought that that's the guy who would meet us at the airport in Africa. Lo and behold, it wasn't. So that's how I got started, was as a Peace Corps volunteer in Eritrea. Eritrea was a province of Ethiopia at the time. There was a civil war going on, and the Peace Corps put me right in the middle of it. Now, they didn't tell me anything about the war, but I'm 21 years old, and I was looking for adventure. So I eventually got evacuated from Asmara when the war came to the city, and they moved me to the eastern part of the country in Harar, which was a total different experience. Then I stayed a third year, in Addis Ababa, the capital, teaching at the American Community School. But that was my entry into Africa, and since then I've been to about 45 countries. I lived 3 years in Somalia. I've been to almost every part of Africa, every part of Africa, and almost every country in Africa over these years. And I've been working very diligently on all of these things about Africa. But for me, I had no mentorship. There was nobody who told me, you should do this, don't do that. I was just saying I wanted to work for the Black experience. I wanted to work for Black people. And I just rationalized. I said, well, the Black people in Africa are Black too. So I said, not just working for the civil rights struggle, but I could work for Black people globally. And that's what launched my career.
Thank you, Mel, for that insightful story. I think it's definitely something that's inspirational to many people who probably are not or were not exposed to the African continent, but it just goes to show that there's lots of different avenues and ways for you to become exposed to the continent, and it can open up a whole new world that you may not have been aware of. So the next question that we have for you is, we want to know a little bit more about Constituency for Africa. You all have been around for more than 30 years, and you got your start in a very unique way. And so, can you tell us, what is the Constituency for Africa, and what are the most significant accomplishments you've had over the past years?
Well, after 3 years in Ethiopia and Eritrea, I came back and got my master's degree. Then I went to work at Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee. I was the assistant administrator for the International Center. I was recruited by an organization that no longer exists, sadly, called AfriCare. I was recruited by AfriCare to go to Somalia as their country director. And AfriCare supported rural development projects, agriculture, water, healthcare, and that sort of thing. So you're building wells, you're building vegetable gardens, you're doing these things to help refugees for the most part. But I became good at telling the story. My reports, I bought a Polaroid camera, and I would put these pictures, I would take a picture of the well and put it in my report and really told the story. So AfriCare brought me back after 3 years to head up a new initiative to educate Americans about Africa. Now, this was in the heart of the Ethiopia famine. We Are the World, Live Aid. So I was all over the country, meeting with various organizations and groups, trying to encourage them to support AfriCare, but also talking about the reality in Africa and how we as African Americans can help. And so C-Pain Lucas, who was my boss, brought me back to Washington to head up this new effort. It was a lot of fun. I was on an airplane about once or twice a week. I was chasing after people like Jesse Jackson and all of the top black leaders in the country. I was just going to the conventions, and it was just a fun job to do. And everybody appreciated the fact that I had lived and worked in Africa for 7 years. And so it was more than just having read about it in books or heard about it. I actually lived there. I spoke languages and that sort of thing. And so I formed an organization called the Constituency for Africa as a network of all of the Black organizations that work on Africa. because what I saw was there was a gap. There was a number of Black organizations that were doing important work in Africa or on Africa, including AfriCare. You had Trans Africa that was working on the Free South Africa movement, trying to get Nelson Mandela freed from prison. You had the National Council of Negro Women that was doing women programs in Africa, and you had a number of others. But none of these organizations worked with each other. In fact, they saw themselves as competition. They competed for funding, they competed for media attention, that sort of thing. So I decided to build a network between all of these organizations and share their information. The main purpose was that everybody needs access to the information. And if we have a meeting with, say, an ambassador or a State Department official, everybody can come. Now, I'm not telling you what to do because your mission is different than their mission. But all of us, regardless, need to have access to the information. And then we could all work together to educate Americans about Africa. So that was the beginning of the Constituency for Africa in 1990. In 1994, CFA, the CFA Constituency for Africa, became an independent organization. I didn't want it to be an independent organization, but my boss at the time became jealous because I was in all the newspapers, I was in magazines, I was on TV, and people around him would say, hey, this guy is stealing your thunder. And so I got pushed out and I was forced to launch an independent organization, the Constituency for Africa. It was a bad decision at the time. It was bad for AfriCare because they lost their base. And it was bad for the CFA because I didn't have to worry about fundraising and organizational matters. I could spend all my time building public and private support for Africa. So that's how CFA got started. Our mission is to educate the public about Africa, to improve cooperation and coordination between organizations that work on Africa. And the big goal would be to help shape U.S. policy toward Africa. And so we've been at it since 1994 as an independent organization. And I can say that we've had a lot of impact on policy. I was making it up as I went along, but I started to really understand what it is we could get done. And creativity was a big part of it. I realized I had access to these national Black organizations like Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, like the NAACP, like the LinkedIn Corporation, like Jack and Jill and many others, because I was working with them at AfriCare. I was just going to all of their conventions and so forth. So I just saw a niche that needed to be filled, and I created the opportunity to do it. And CFA's mission today remains very much the same as it was in the early stages. We're a small organization, but we have a tremendous footprint, and we managed to have a lot of impact on various policies toward Africa.
And before we move on to the next point, I want to dig a little deeper and ask, could you share about the impact of the programs that I mentioned before, like the YALI program, the Mandela Washington Fellowship Program, and the impact that's had on U.S. policy and on the
Well,
continent?
we've had a lot of, like I said, impact, partly because there was no one else working on this stuff. Back then, we always thought you could not talk to the State Department. Those guys were like gods or something. You could not talk to USAID. You could not talk to the Ambassador Corps. And I broke all those rules. I broke all of those rules. I started taking groups over to the State Department to meet with the Assistant Secretary in Lloyd Henderson in the big room. I would bring 200 or 300 people over there to have a meeting with the Assistant Secretary. We also went to the African embassies. We took groups over to meet with the ambassadors to get their priorities and how we as diaspora could work together. So when I look at the impact, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA was one of the early ones. I was asked by some of the people who were actually writing, who wrote the legislation, and were trying to get the Africa Growth and Africa Growth and Opportunity Act passed. And so they saw me as a person who could help get them to do it. So I was asked to organize town hall meetings around the United States to talk about it, to use African ambassadors. So we were in places like Memphis, Tennessee, and Jackson, Mississippi, and Cincinnati, and Denver, and Los Angeles, all over the country. I would take groups of experts out to these countries. Now, these were really popular meetings because no one out there had seen an African ambassador or could shake a hand or to know about this. And back then, the U.S. policy to Africa was largely one of dropping food out of an airplane, Biafra. And, we would take these big old helicopters, and just drop the food out of the, and people scrambled down at the ground and grab the food. And that was the extent of U.S. policy toward Africa. We wanted to change that. You know, some of these pallets that came out the airplanes hit people on the head, killed people. I ask myself sometimes, did we help more people? Did we hurt more people than we helped? I don't know. So AGOA was one of the early successes. We got it passed and signed into law by Bill Clinton. And, it remains the main private sector initiative between the U.S. and Africa. Flawed very much so, but it's still very much there. We also got involved in the HIV/AIDS legislation during George W. Bush's time. And we lobbied Bush. My chairman then was Congressman Ron Delos out of California. And he was a real dynamic guy. And we lobbied the Bush administration. We wanted them to commit $3 billion for HIV/AIDS globally, a global campaign to combat AIDS. And we were pushing them hard and sending letters to the editor, doing all kinds of things to get their attention. Well, Bush did not know much about Africa when he got to that office, but he had a lot of good common sense. And so he gets to the microphone at the State of the Union and announced his program, and he said $19 billion for HIV/AIDS in Africa. We were just shocked by that. But we know if we did not push for the $3 billion, it never would have happened that they would have expanded it to $19 billion. So we were heavily involved in HIV/AIDS in Africa. The Rwanda genocide in 1994, I personally went over to the White House and talked to the National Security Advisor to send a delegation to Rwanda to assess the impact of the genocide. And they accepted. And they gave us Air Force Two, the Vice President's plane, and 40 of us, 5 members of Congress and others, went to Rwanda to assess the genocide, which was absolutely tragic. But nevertheless, we were able to push the U.S. government to do this. And we got involved in a whole lot of other things. I got to the point where I started writing, developing policy papers for the presidents. And one of them I wrote to was for President Barack Obama. And Obama sent one of his aides to see me and asked what could he do. Because when he came to power, the Republicans had wrecked the economy, of course. And, because they didn't want this black man to look good. Bush. And I can't do what George Bush did, 19 billion for HIV/AIDS, 5 billion Millennium Challenge account. I can't do that because I don't have the resources. I need to have a year or two so that I can, take care, get people back to work and get the economy moving again. So what do you think I can do? I pulled some people together and developed a concept paper. And one of the ideas was that he should not spend his time chasing old African leaders. Don't spend your time chasing Mugabe and Paul Biya and Riek Machar, and don't spend your time chasing these old African leaders. Spend your time with the young ones coming up, the next generation of leaders who are coming up. They love the ideal, and that became the framework for the Young African Leaders Initiative, which I think is the most successful U.S. program in Africa. When you look at these young people, I mean, there's thousands of them who have come through this program. It involves 6 weeks here at a campus in the United States in the summertime. And so at the end of the 6 weeks, they would all come to Washington and spend 4 or 5 days here in Washington and have our convention. They would meet all these big people in the government and so forth. But I will say the whole time, during the duration of the program, which is still going on, I have yet to meet any one of the Yali alumni who I was not impressed with. These are dynamic young people. And the beauty of Yali is that the one from Senegal met the one from Zimbabwe, and the one from Kenya met the one from Guinea. And so all of a sudden, the young people get to meet each other, because a big part of the problem in Africa is everybody looks out for their own little tribe or their own little ethnic group or their own little country. That was designed by the colonial masters. They did not want Africa united. They did not want Africans knowing other Africans or seeing themselves as all African. They wanted you to see yourself as from Guinea-Bissau, or you're from Ghana, or you're from Swaziland, And so this is what the divide and conquer would do. So what Yali inadvertently did was allow them to meet each other. And so these young people, of course, are technology savvy, emailing and Zooming and all kinds of things. So they really have developed friendships and all of this kind of thing, which I think in the long term is going to pay big dividends for the continent as we move forward. So I'm excited about what has happened with Yali.
Thank you, Mel. Uh, and a lot of what you talked about so far, you kept saying we. You said you were bringing people together. You said you were taking people to the State Department. These people that you were organizing could collectively be known as the African diaspora. To you, who's a part of that diaspora, and
Not
why is it
leading
important for all
to
of us?
not being
Why is it important for all of us to come together to do this work?
Well, when I came to Washington, we were really balkanized. You had African Americans who were mainly the ones you saw working on Africa were African Americans. If you saw somebody at the State Department or AID, likely if they were black, they were an African American. So African immigrants were completely left out of the picture. But many of the young African immigrants were students. You know, they were students. They were just getting started. They were not senior people, so they did not qualify for jobs in the State Department. But I knew a lot of them. I knew some of them involved in advocacy. I knew some of them involved in various kind of things. So I just went out the way to say, okay, who's in the African diaspora? If you black, if you are African of descent from Africa, and whether you were born in Africa or born in Chicago or born in Montreal or born in Jamaica, you're part of the diaspora. So it really includes all African people who descended from Africa, whether you were born, if you were born, came here during slavery, or you came here I say either came on a slave ship or you came by airplane. Now, most of the African immigrants came by airplane. You know, that's a tremendous different experience than having your people come by slave ship. But nevertheless, we are all the diaspora, women, men, young people, old people. If you're a descendant of Africa, you are part of the diaspora.
Thank you. I think it's really important that we define what the diaspora means because, as you always say, they like to keep us all apart and keep us thinking that we're all very distinctly different, but we are all descendants from the continent and we're all fighting the same struggles globally. And so I think it's really important that we define what the diaspora is, especially in the context of the United States, because sometimes, like you said, back in the 90s, African immigrants were left out. But sometimes when we talk about the diaspora discussion, African Americans are often left out of that discussion. And so we think it's really important that we make sure that everybody is included and everybody has a role and a place to play. And I think the work that you've done has shown what that role could look like. So I think we're going to move to the next question. And we kind of want to give some context for the continent or for the audience here. What do you think are some of the most pressing issues facing Africa today? And, how is the current political situation in the US going to affect the continent?
Well, I think U.S. policy toward Africa has always been bad. Like I said, when I came to Washington, the policy, you heard about people dying in Biafra, so they organized some military planes to drop food out of the airplane. That was it. They had no understanding of the impact. Organizations like Africare were important in the sense that they started to send former Peace Corps volunteers, people who had already knew something about Africa. Most of Africare's employees were former Peace Corps volunteers, so they had already been to Africa. And so they took a different approach to Africa, and they went there to help train people, to help provide technology, to help do things to improve the quality of life of African people. And people like myself, I'm a former Peace Corps volunteer. When I went to Africa with Africare, I went with a whole different attitude. I knew Tarzan was not real. I understood what some of the realities were. I had the language skill, cross culture skill, and I fit right in. People thought I was from Sudan or something because I knew some of the languages and that kind of thing. But when I look at the problems of Africa, the biggest part of the problem is Africa is fragmented, divided, and divided up. The colonial people who colonized Africa still want to control those mineral resources. Everybody knows that Africa is the wealthiest continent in the world. Gold, diamond, coltan, lithium, all kinds of minerals and all kinds of exist in Africa, and they want it. The Americans want it, the French want it, the British want it, the Chinese want it. Everybody want Africa's natural resources, but they don't want to build Africa up, and they don't want Africa to be able to negotiate properly for the rest of the world to have access to African resources. And so, on the one hand, we all know Africa needs help, but on the other hand, the rest of the world is not negotiating with Africa in any kind of way. So when you look at the problems are many. Some of those problems are caused by ethnicity. You look at Sudan, like I said, I spent a lot of time in the Horn of Africa, and boy, it just seems like when they fight, the Ethiopians will fight the Eritreans on one day, and the next year they're fighting the Somalis, and the next day they're fighting somebody else. There's nobody else to fight with, they fight with themselves. It's almost like they're paid for it. Some of this is the Western countries and the Eastern countries too. They're selling weapons to Africa, in exchange for natural resources. So a country like Ukraine would sell weapons to Ethiopia, and then they go to Eritrea and say, look, they got those weapons, and we could sell you some weapons too. So they would sell weapons to both sides because they want the conflict to continue. So a lot of the problems in Africa are caused from the outside, but the biggest part of the problem is Africa is not united. The Africa Union, by and large, is gutless, and it doesn't have any kind of a sense of a mission that it's trying to achieve. All we get at the AU summits is talk, and this is one thing that the next generation is going to have to correct. We got to go beyond this talking business, and we got to go. We got to focus on good governance. We got to focus on the fact that these little borders that are dividing African countries that don't mean anything. You'll find that some of the ethnic groups are on both sides of the border. So the borders are not there for Africa. The borders are there for all other people to divide Africa and fragment it. So I think the biggest issue with Africa is a lack of unity among the countries.
Thank you. So we have one more question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience to ask you questions next. And because we are looking to mobilize the youth, and you yourself have talked about the next generation a lot already, we want to know, what role do you see young people playing in strengthening Africa and the diaspora communities?
Well, Masiri and Nasim, you are very much involved. You're working closely with CFA, and so you are actually, I'm happy to see you guys are involved in our policy collaborations as we start to bring some of this together. I think that the next generation has to be involved at all aspects. They gotta learn. They gotta learn the ropes. They gotta meet the people who are decision makers. They gotta figure out how to have access to policy makers. They gotta know how to pressure. Put pressure. The only thing you get is when you can pressure somebody to do something, or give them a reason to do it. And so there's a lot of learning that needs to go on. And when I came along, no one was there to do that for me. I had to make it up as I go along. And so what I think part of this is to be good students, but the other part is to volunteer where you can, to just get involved so that you can learn the ropes. I think a big part of this is a learning exercise. And once you learn it, you got to actually apply it. And a lot of young people are good at talking about it, but they won't take the step to actually apply it. I think what you're doing with NoirUnited is excellent, and because you're learning as you do this stuff. You're learning about people, and you're learning about processes, and you're learning about. So I think the next generation must be in the room, and I was one of the first one to insist in that. When I was coming along, you would go to these big summits and so forth in Africa and other places, and there was nobody in the room under 50 years old. You had to be a senior person to be in a room to talk about this stuff. And I always thought that was fickle. And I was the first one to try to broker that deal. One, that you got to have women in the room. And half the people in Africa are women. So I was the one who demanded that women also be at the table. Gender must be balanced in these meetings. And then I insisted on the next generation, not just be in the room and sitting in the back of the room, but be there and put your hand in the air and be part of the process. And I think that's the best way to learn and to engage. And that's what we're doing with the Constituency for Africa. We know that we're not going to be here forever. Another thing that I saw was a lot of the guys who were in front of me, there were some dynamic people. Leon Sullivan comes to mind. My boss, C. Payne Lucas from Africa, comes to mind. Randall Robinson, who was the head of Trans Africa. Dorothy Height, who was the head of the National Council of Negro Women. Dynamic people in all regards. They could give a great speech. They could do all kinds of things, but they were not. They're in their 80s and 90s and would not leave the job. And so they die in office. They die shortly thereafter. Then nobody is there to carry the ball forward. And all of these organizations that I mentioned are now defunct. They're gone. How could it be that organizations like Trans Africa or like Africa that had a budget, something like $100 million a year budget, how could they be defunct at this stage? And so some of this we could blame on other people, but some of this we have to ourselves as Africans and Africans in the diaspora have to take responsibility to make sure that we pass the torch.
All right. Thank you, Mel, for that. I wholeheartedly agree with your sentiments. And I thank you for commending me and Nasim and the work that we're doing for NoirUnited. It's especially important for all of us as young people here to know that we also have the power to make an impact. And, seeing that you flew all the way to Ethiopia at the age of 21 with no clue about where you were going.
I was scared. I was frightened. My
Right.
father told me I would get eaten by a lion. Yeah, and I didn't know because I didn't know anything about Africa.
You see, and now you know more about Africa than anyone I know, even Africans themselves. So I just want to thank you for speaking to us today. I'm gonna now open it up for Q&A for any questions that people may have. So you guys can come off of mute, or you can drop your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand, however.
Yeah, I have a question. First off, thank you so much for coming and speaking to us today. This has been incredibly informative. So I'm glad to have had the opportunity to hear you speak today. So thank you. My question is, you spoke a lot about how you have done a lot of work, like with CFA, with partnering with other organizations, networking, connecting with other organizations, etc. And I'm wondering if you have any advice about what are like the most productive ways to do that? What are some like big successes you've had in partnering with organizations? I think sometimes that can feel kind of tricky, and knowing how to connect with different organizations, how to convince them to like join you in the work that you're doing. So I'm wondering if you have any advice on that.
Well, when I first got started, all of the organizations had a big person, like a king or a queen, running them. And my boss, C. Payne, Randall Robinson, they would not talk to each other. They would badmouth each other. I'm at Africa, so my boss would say, "Oh, what Randall think he is? Who is he? He's in Newsweek magazine or something." And he would get upset about that, because everybody wanted to be Mr. Africa, or they wanted to be the woman, the top person. And I always saw that was flawed. And so I knew I could not get those guys around the table because they was already predisposed and they knew what they wanted to be. So what I went after the mid-level person in those organizations. I went after the education person. I went after the person who was running public relations. I went after the person who was doing other things within the organization. And we found that we could work together. I'm not your boss. You're not my boss. And we formed a thing called the African American Unity Caucus. And for 3 years, we were having 3-day retreats out in Maryland. And we would get everybody around the table. And a lot of it was to get to know each other, find ways we could collaborate, cooperate. We actually created the mechanism to start working together. And I carry that forward throughout my work. I don't do anything by myself. And I don't call myself the leader of anything. I end up leading a lot of stuff, but I don't see myself as anybody's boss. I'm okay, you're okay. The key is to bring the effort together. And so one got to be sensitive to that. And one got to approach people as brothers and sisters. Can we do this together? There's many times I organize a meeting, but I'll ask somebody else to lead it. You know, my job is to get that meeting organized. I don't have to lead it, you know, and that has bode well for me, is to try not to be the sharpest knife in the drawer all the time, but I have access to all the sharp knives, and I do that very well. And so I don't get, I'm not intimidated by anybody. I'll meet a president, I'll meet the Secretary of State. A lot of my friends are people who are sitting in high places, but I don't bow down to them. They know that, but I respect them. But I respect them, even the ones, and I just developed that as a personality guide. I'm a runner, and sometimes I'm out during my run, I'll see a homeless person in the corner. They see me running. Some of them are inspired by that, but I'll stop and talk to them. You know, this is about sisters and brothers. It's not about I'm a big shot and you a little shot. So one got to develop a keen sense of respect for others. I'm okay, you're okay, and it doesn't matter if you're a young person or you're an old person. We can talk. And there's no question that I can't feel like that's too big for me or too little for me. I can't. I don't operate that way. So a lot of it is a change of attitude. When I came to Washington, people would get uptight because you went to a certain church or not. Oh, you went to Metropolitan Baptist. I went to Shiloh, or I'm an AKA and you're a Delta, or you know, we found we explored ways to divide ourselves up, and I fought that. I still fight it with vigor. Sure enough, you could join an organization, you could be involved in a fraternity, sorority, or church, or whatever. But I'm okay. You okay? I'm not going to judge you based on, you know, what organization you're affiliated with. And I've tried to pioneer the effort to break that stuff down, because it only serves to divide us up, to fragment us. I'm a big shot, you're not, and all this kind of thing. And that's one of the ways. That's one of the reasons why we, as Black people in this country, have not made more progress. We spend our whole time shining stuff as opposed to substantive. I hope that's helpful to you.
That is very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. So if we'll have the next person, I'm sure you all have questions. You can come off the mic and answer or ask.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Melvin Freeman, and this is the first time that I'm joining in, and I'm just excited to see the young energy and the interest in Africa. And, you know, I just know that this is a great movement, and to hear the experience of Brother Melvin Foote. I never met you before, but I found you on Facebook, and I had a chance to read some things about your work and see some of your travels, and I am inspired. A little bit about myself. I'm part of a social media group. For the last 13 years, we've been developing a platform where we incorporated all of the features of Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram on one platform. And it's designed to give what we consider the body of Christ a turnkey solution to all of its social media needs. The program itself has not launched yet, but we're going to be launching probably within the next 30 days. And it's a huge undertaking. It took a lot of work that we put into this. And this is designed to offer this communication apparatus to those of us who may not be able to tap into this type of global approach. So I don't know if there's anything that I could do to help with what's going on here, but I just wanted to introduce myself. And if there at some point any questions, any levels of interest, or if there any dialogue that we can establish, I'm open. I have the ears of the founder and the CEO of the company, and we're definitely interested in being able to share this with our brothers and sisters around the globe, and specific in the motherland.
Well, I will say this: you got the right first name. That's for sure. That's a good start.
Yes, sir.
You know, I mean, the name, it means a whole lot, right? I made Melvin popular. A lot of people laugh at it. Let me say this about the next generation. You know, COVID came along, and all of a sudden we had to, you know, give up our offices. and we had to stay at our home and get to our computer. But the technology that came out of COVID, and a lot of this is the next generation's technology, the fact that we having this meeting on Zoom, and now Zoom is it's a preferred platform. We had a meeting last week, and 10 or so of us were in a room downtown, and the others were all over the world. Somebody from Namibia, somebody else from South Africa, and you don't even miss a beat. It's real time. So I'm just saying that the technology is critical. How do you implement the technology? That's not my field. That's more like Nassim and Masiri. You guys are going to figure out what's needed and how to do it. I just take advantage of it. I was the first one to use a fax machine in our community. I remember when the fax machine came online, and I became the fax king. And people would call me up saying, I'm using up all their paper, because I would just be feeding that fax machine. And because I said, well, I don't have to mail this to you. I could just fax it to you. So I've always embraced it. Zoom, and you saw my Facebook page. I'm also on LinkedIn, WhatsApp, and so now the technology is something that it really came with the current generation, with the young people now under 35. You brought this to the table, and so I applaud it. And I'm sure there's some other stuff out there that we haven't even begun to explore, but you got to keep moving because one of the challenges is resources, and the biggest part of the problem I faced is a lack of resources. There was a time when CFA was well funded. We had money from Ford Foundation, Carnegie Corporation, Chevron, Coca-Cola, and so forth. But the money all dried up. Everybody talks about Project 2025 like it's something new with Trump. This thing has been going on for about 20 years. And one of the things they did was try to kill all the Black organizations and take out the Black leaders. They didn't kill you physically, but they just made sure you didn't get funding to do the work. And if you don't get funding to do the work, you go away. All of the Black media, what did they do? They cut off the ads. No longer were they going to, provide ads to Jet Magazine and to Emerge Magazine and so forth. So now the Black media has been decimated. So you got to know that there are people out there who don't want you to succeed. They don't want us to be having this kind of conversation. I wouldn't be surprised if they knock on your door, Missouri, tonight. They say, oh, we don't want this, where you actually bringing people together for education and understanding and so you got to know that there are people out there who see what you're doing as a threat.
Don't worry, man. I'm keeping my eyes open, keeping my
Keep
head
your eyes open.
Does anyone else have a question?
I have a question. Hi, everybody. My name is Pasi Aribo, and I am Masiri's and Nassim's little sister.
Wow.
So with all the work that you've done from the first time you've landed in Africa and the way it's grown so much to now, what do you want to, what would you like to see in the near future in terms of progressiveness with Africans and African Americans as a whole?
Well, that's a big question. I'm starting to write my book. I've been threatening to do this for 3 or 4 years, and I'm determined to have this book written by next year, which would be a memoir, partly a memoir, but partly lessons learned, something aimed at the next generation. You shouldn't have to go through what I've gone through. There should be some easier steps that you can avoid. The bigger thing I see is people are intimidated by it. They're afraid to get in front of an audience. I was afraid at one point, but not anymore. I was. And so what I really want to see happen is that African people, say here in the United States, I want to see the African diaspora unite. I want to see in any given room, there are African immigrants, African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, and children of African immigrants who maybe never been to Africa, but they are, their parents might be African. All of them see this stuff differently, and we've been pitted against each other, for the benefit of, mainstream America. They don't want us to be working collaboratively. And so if I see some movement in that area where we actually are trying to get people, find platforms, like I tried with Yali in 2017, when the Yali came for their conference here in Washington, I got the organizers to allow us to bring 100 from Yali and 100 from the diaspora, dynamic young Black people from the diaspora, and 100 dynamic young people from Yale to have a one-day conference. And it was fantastic. In every regard, fantastic. Also, you start to realize that you got African Americans who can, so the next year I go back to them and say, why don't we triple that? Let's get 300. And the woman said, a white woman said, no, I'm sorry, we don't have a budget this year. We can't do it. And in other words, she didn't want it to happen. So between that first year and the next year, somebody said, don't let this happen because we don't want African immigrants and Africans on the ground in Africa to really meet these African Americans and form businesses and collaborative relationships. And so this is what we're up against. And so when I want to see, what I like to see is us to overcome that regardless, you know. The kind of program here is a step in the right direction.
Hi, my name's Corey, and I just wanted to say thank you again so much, Mr. Melvin Foote, for just speaking with us and sharing your time this evening. I've learned so much from this conversation. And I do have a question. So you've spoken a bit tonight about just the racial and ethnic and kind of social divisiveness across the Black diaspora and across Africa in the hands of colonialization within like that divisiveness. And so I'm kind of curious if CFA and yourself have engaged or participated in like any maybe like reconciliation efforts or reconstruction efforts, and kind of just wanted to get your general thoughts on like what it looks like to promote like sustainable reconciliation in Africa.
Yeah. Well, like I said, in 2007, 2009, we formed the African American Unity Caucus here, and we brought 40 representatives from 40 organizations together. Many of them were heading organizations or they were big shots in mainstream organizations, but they were all Black. Some were immigrants, some were African American. The whole purpose of that was to get to know each other and facilitate dialogue. Now, there's been a number of conversations in Africa. In 2012, I think it was, the Africa Union launched the sixth region, which is the diaspora. And they had a big conference in South Africa. I was there for that. And they had, something like 50 or 60 heads of state was there. You know, and all of a sudden the African diaspora is going to be the sixth region of Africa. You got ECOWAS, you got SADC, and you got the others, and then you got the diaspora. And that was supposed to solve the problem. But what I've seen is the African Union actually gone backward. For a few years, we were making dynamic progress, but the woman who they had here as the AU representative was very dynamic, but she lost her compass, if you will, and she ran afoul of the African Union. So they spent the time getting rid of her. They fired her. They also tried to wipe away all the work that she did, including anybody who worked with her, like me. And so for 2 years, 3 years, I had no contact with the African Union mission because of the person they hired. Not the person, you know, I was doing the work because I agreed with the work that would need to be done. So I think a big part of this problem is Africans got this thing about control. And one of the things that prevents them from uniting is all the presidents of these little small countries, they still want to be president. So they still got to have an army. They got to have their own embassy. They got to have their own, all of this, you know, everybody got their own stuff. We got 54 embassies here in Washington, African embassies in Washington. Why do you need 54 embassies to talk to Africa? And most of them are not set up to even do the job that they're supposed to do. And so we spend a lot of our time just wasting time. And we got to figure some of this stuff out seriously. And we got to find a ways of funding our stuff. I find that a lot of the countries in Africa will spend millions of dollars lobbying Washington. And they all of them hire these white lobby firms on K Street, L Street, and paying all of this money. And then when something serious go down, who do they call? They call me. You know, when they're cutting off the arms in Liberia, oh, Brother Foote, can you come over? You're a real brother. Can you help us stop this? But yet you'll give all your money to these white lobby firms to do what, you know? And right now I had a call this evening about one of the countries in West Africa who are trying to find a way to get a meeting with Donald Trump because they think they can cut a deal with him or some kind of way to help their country. And I'm saying, boy, we are way off of where we ought to be on this. And I don't see I see country by country, I see some promising. You have the young guy in Senegal. I'm optimistic that, you have the trade minister in Botswana who was a former Yali alumni. You see a little progress go here, but then you see over there go completely wrong. Next thing you know, you got president for life. Next thing you know, I want to be, I'm the only one who can rule my country. And boy, we got so much work to do. So I'm just hoping that this next generation can help drive the change in Africa that we all need. Africa is not going anywhere the way we are situated today, and we got a lot of work to do to make sure that. And one of the things that individuals can do on this call is get to meet. If you're from Nigeria, get to meet somebody from Ethiopia. You just go out your way to meet them, and get to meet somebody from Zimbabwe. You just go out your way to try to form these relationships. All you got to do is be African, and whether you're African American or African, I try to be the ultimate African American. When I call myself an African American, I mean it, and I'm proud of that, But don't, and so a lot of Africans are intimidated because I speak Amharic, I speak Tigrinya. Wait a minute, why are you calling me something other than an African? And I push the envelope on some of this stuff, but we have a lot of work to do in our own reconciliation, both in our community here and the groups that we work with. We got to push unity, cooperation, coordination, and facilitate the dialogue among us.
Thank you, Mel. Does anyone have a question? I have one, but I want to make sure that everyone gets to ask. Okay, I'll ask my question. So Mel, there's been a lot going on in the news, a lot going on in DC. I think we've all kind of experienced the franticness that's happening, and a lot of people have been losing their jobs, losing opportunities, given the recent USAID cuts and all the executive orders that are changing America as we know it. And so I think a lot of people on this call, a lot of people that I've spoken to are trying to figure out what's next. So I guess my question is like, how do we as young people navigate such a such a landscape that's changing very rapidly? How do we navigate that? How do we remain motivated to continue to fight the power or kind of build institutions while we have people kind of attacking our livelihoods? So a lot of people often have to make the decision, if they want to do community work, they want to do, they may want to do all those things, but they can't because they're working or they have to figure out how they're going to survive. And so what kind of advice do you have for us who are in this position and kind of trying to figure out how to be right now?
Well, part of the reason that we're in this position is that many of us, especially many young people, didn't vote. And if they voted for the wrong party. In other words, what we're learning is that your voting matters. Another part of this is there's no simple solution to this. For those of us who've been around on the planet for a while, we recognize that the struggle continues. Do we think that all of a sudden these people are going to give us affirmative action and all of a sudden we're going to have equal opportunity to education and to housing and to healthcare? Do we really think that was going to happen when in fact the percentage of white people in this country is shrinking compared to the percentage of people of color? And so this is what really is driving all of the stuff we see today. They see it not only in the United States, they see it around the world because a lot of the white populations are aging rapidly in Europe and so forth. And what they see about the immigrants coming, all of a sudden, the scores of them, who are younger and more vigorous and actually going to inherit the world. We all know about the percentage of Africans. So you better know that the struggle is going to continue. And so what I would advise someone is to develop your flexibility for sure. Get your education the best you can. Get your networking together the best you can. Put yourself in survival mode, anyway. Nothing about life is guaranteed. I know people who are, doing quite well and got a contract to do this and contract to do that. All of a sudden they find themselves without anything. And a lot of these people with USAID are like my daughter's USAID, and we talk about it every day. But you're thinking that, oh, I'm sitting pretty. I got this job. Look at me. I'm sitting on the hill, and everything is going to be hunky dory. I would have told you to start your own private business while you got that job with USAID. Start your own little consulting practice. I consult. I got CFA, but I also got my own consulting practice. And CFA is, financially is dried up a long time ago. But I make enough money to live off of. I'm not going to be rich, nor do I need to be rich. So you got to think. You got to think in terms of, you got to think broader about this. I think there's going to be a brighter day ahead at some point, but none of us see it right now. I don't see it. I don't know if you watch the news every day. I mean, the press conference today was just absolutely, make you ask yourself what's going to happen tonight. They might start dropping bombs. And so this is what we're up against. There are people out there who see your very existence as a threat, and if you're bright and articulate and well educated, they see you as a threat. And so a lot of this is about reduce their job. You got my job because you got a master's degree, you got this, you got that, but they see you as taking one of their jobs. And it's a crazy world we're in. I don't give up. I'm an African until I die, and that's my attitude about it. So there's no easy answer to it. And I think as a young person growing up right now, I can't say it was any better when I was growing up because we were marching in the streets, burning down, starting riots and all this kind of thing in all the cities. Think how crazy that was. And one of the reasons they capitulated with affirmative action and some of this other stuff was because of that. And please don't burn down our downtowns. We're going to come up with a program to, and housing. Oh yeah, please don't, attack us. But now that they know that that period is over, they've done all kinds of research on who the rebel rousers are, who's going to start to stand up, and they've done a lot to eliminate these people. In my mind, let's realize the struggle continues, and you should recognize that. Read up on everything you can read up on. Become really all the networks that you got. Keep building your networks, and I know you guys are doing that. That's going to be your best assurance of a bright future. But also start your own business so that you're not depending on a government job or institutional job. Maybe you get an institutional job or a government job, but also have your own private business on the side.
Thank you, Mel. I think you couldn't have wrapped us up more better than that. I mean, we already know that the reason why our enemies are able to continue to be in the place that they're currently in is because they have wealth and resources. And so we have to be able to generate our own wealth and resources so that we can continue to protect and serve our own community as well.
Yeah.
So we just want to first take a moment. I want everyone to take a moment and thank Melvin for coming to speak with us today. This was a great time to listen to one of our elders speak because he is still here and because he has a lot of knowledge that he has already given to us and will continue to give. We just want to take some time to thank him.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mel.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Foote, this is Melvin Freeman. I'd like to know if it was all right if I could leave you my contact information. I would like to speak to you or anyone who's interested in knowing more about this platform. I think this is vital that we get in on it early.
Thank you. You can share.
Give it to Nasim, yeah.
Yeah, you can share your information and we can pass it along.
Okay, I just go to share on the computer here.
I'll put my email in the chat.
Okay.
And so thank you everyone else for joining. This conversation was recorded. If you are a NoirUnited member, you will have access to the recording so you can go back and listen to it. You can find our membership on our website. If you go to NoirUnited and then go to Take Action, you'll see the page to sign up for the membership. And yeah, so we're going to go ahead and end off here. We really appreciate you for joining us for an hour and 15 minutes. And we are continuing to move forward. We'll have our next speaker series next month, and we're going to continue building community with you all and everyone else that we're able to meet. So thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
So.